in one, I think it was a fundamental concept of exercise science, but it's one that's also often like misunderstood and dismissed. Can you walk me through what are some things that on a foundational aspect are misunderstood or poorly misunderstood?
Sure. And you know what, when we're looking at this, obviously this is looking at athletes as being either force oriented or velocity oriented athletes. And then the idea of this is what is the intersection? And so that's what the force velocity relationship is here. And we'll get into that in a second. Originally, though, a lot of the research looking at force velocity was just examining from a muscular contractile level what happens to force output as velocity changes. And all of that original research, which was done back in the 70s and 80s, was looking at muscle contractile capability. And those studies showed that as velocity increases, force decreases. So sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that. The first time I heard that, it was like, say what? I mean, if I'm going faster, shouldn't the force go up? And the reality is when you test things isokinetically, it doesn't. So when you set isokinetic dynamometers at higher speeds, you see lower force production in the transducer. So what you're measuring as a force output. That's changed, obviously, in our approach to force velocity has changed over the years, particularly in light of velocity-based training. So that came into vogue, what, about 10 years ago, Marcelo, roughly?
Yeah,
Is that when you saw it hit the
Tendo
market?
sensors probably. Tendo sensors were probably the traditional thing that I saw in the strength and conditioning market. Um, the first, I think, accelerometer was mild test at that time.
Hmm.
And then we have several options today. So
Yeah, so now when we're looking at this chart here, this figure, what it's really doing is taking athletes and you have the y-axis, the force axis, F0 being your peak force output, and velocity axis is like which of one of these axes are you operating on? Are you more a velocity-based athlete or you're more a force-based athlete? And I think what's happening is we're pushing people because of velocity-based training. I think what we're doing is pushing people towards working with lower loads and higher velocities as a thing. And I'm not sure that is always necessarily goal oriented or goal driven. It's just that's what's in vogue at the moment. And the question here is are we racing toward the middle of this thing? Are we trying to become too much velocity athlete and forgetting that there's a force component that we have to be dealing with?
yeah, and that kind of reframes this conversation, right? Like the point of shifting focus, velocity to acceleration. And that really is kind of what I really thought this was pretty powerful of an image. Um, it really brings me to like that question of, when is an athlete or when is anyone strong enough actually mean?
Right. Look, if we're looking at sprinters and the ultimate objective is to get someone to run 100 meters in a lower time, then ultimately their velocity is what's important. But if we're looking at training applications, the question is what gets you to that? What lowers your time? But you mentioned acceleration, and that's what's really become interesting to me because at the end of the day, the human body is basically an acceleration machine,
Mhm.
right? It's designed to accelerate objects, to move objects, but not just to move them, but to get them from a static or even if it's moving, to change the acceleration of an object so that we can reach certain movement goals. We can move objects, whether we're eating, drinking, accelerating something towards our mouth or accelerating our body towards some direction, or more importantly, what I've discovered is decelerating, which is also acceleration. And that to me, especially when it comes to athletic performance, the ability to slow velocity quickly is critical to performance and even health, overall health and efficiency.